Welcome back to our channel, where we explore the darkest chapters of human history. Tonight, we delve into a tale so chilling, so twisted, it defies belief. It's a story that asks us to question the very nature of good and evil, and to confront the terrifying notion that a monster can hide behind a veil of sanctity. This is the story of a figure once revered as a saint, who became known as one of the most prolific killers in modern history. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode filled with shocking revelations. Now, let's open the case file on Sister Mary Agnes. Montclair liked to think of itself as a city of order. Broad boulevards, cafe terraces that smelled of roasted coffee at dawn, and a cathedral whose spire pierced the sky like a silent promise. It was the sort of place where people locked their doors out of habit rather than fear. Neighbors knew each other's children by name. The parish bulletin listed births and funerals in the same breath. When something out of the ordinary happened, it felt like a ripple across an otherwise still pond. Visible, briefly alarming, and then politely explained away. Into that ordered life stepped Amelia Thorne, who answered to Sister Mary Agnes. She arrived at St. Jude's Outreach with the soft certainty of someone who had already decided how the world ought to be saved. There was nothing theatrical about her entrance. No trumpets, no carrying of relics, only a woman in a plain habit, face gentle, hands steady, voice like warm honey. People called her an angel before they fully understood why. Her story, when told, read like a sermon on devotion. Amelia had grown up in the city's poorer quarter, a child who learned early what hunger felt like and what a warm blanket could mean to a shivering frame. She was quick to forgive, quicker still to give. At 22, she walked into the convent gates and never walked back out as the same person. The veil changed her name but did nothing to blunt the compassion behind her eyes. If anything, it intensified it. As Sister Mary Agnes, she seemed to move with a purpose that was both practiced and holy. St. Jude's was a modest operation, a soup kitchen by day, a night shelter by necessity. Volunteers rotated in and out. Donations arrived in fits and starts. It was not a place for headlines. Yet the shelter became, under Sister Mary Agnes's watchful care, a place where stories changed. Vagrants who staggered in with nothing left in the world left with a small sack of clothes, a warm bowl, and a promise. Rest a few nights in our annex, and we'll help you find work in the morning. Young men, often new arrivals to Montclair, bewildered and exhausted, were the ones she targeted for extra kindness. She found them jobs, recommended them to employers, tucked them into beds, folded blankets around shoulders like a mother tucking in a child. The city noticed. Donations ticked up. The mayor praised St. Jude's at ribbon cuttings. Community leaders cited Sister Mary Agnes as an exemplar of charity. People began to leave notes of gratitude on the parish board. Thank you for opening your arms to the lost. Her photo, soft light, rosary in hand, appeared in the parish newsletter under the headline Angel of Mercy. The image fit so neatly into Montclair's narrative of itself. Beneath those public pages, however, a darker pattern began to stitch itself into the city's seams. It was subtle at first. A stray report, a missing person form filed by a distant sister in another state, a parent who'd come to town searching only to be told their son had disappeared. The police took these reports in the manner of busy departments: logged, categorized, shelved. There was always a benign reason at hand. A young man looking for work, a fight with a lover, a desire to vanish. Montclair's precinct was not a place that expected monsters. And yet the missing kept arriving in clusters. Over a few months, a dozen young men who had some connection, ephemeral or concrete, to St. Jude's simply stopped appearing in the world. They were not headline material. They were poor, transient, not people who'd regularly make family phone calls. Their disappearances left holes only sharp enough for those nearest to notice. A cousin in Milwaukee, a mother who hadn't heard from her son in months, a neighboring parish volunteer who'd made tea for him one evening. These were the people who would whisper that something was wrong. Sister Mary Agnes moved within that fragile fog like a bomb. She sat at the shelter's head table and handed out cups of soup with an ease that left onlookers mollified, grateful, and suspicious of no one. In small ways that should have invited scrutiny, she cultivated trust. She walked a man to a job interview and stayed until he felt steady. She sat with a newcomer while they scrubbed their face and combed through what few possessions they had. She pressed a rosary into trembling fingers and murmured a prayer. Those acts protected her with an armor of gratitude. It was easy, then, to see how she might have exploited the city's predisposition to see only good where it wanted to see good. The men she favored were often described the same way by friends who later spoke to investigators. Polite, hungry for steadiness, eager to believe they had been given a lifeline. They weren't glamorous victims. They were invisible to most and incandescent in the moment when Sister Mary Agnes guided them through the shelter door. Rumors, when they began, were whispered in corners. An old volunteer muttered that she had seen the sisters carrying extra bedsheets down to the annex late at night. A kitchen worker noted that the ledger recorded meals for men who had never checked in. Neighbors said they sometimes saw figures leaving the convent grounds at odd hours. Not men of the night, but silhouettes with straight backs, walking as if bowed by something weightier than sleep. But those were small things, anecdotal and easily explained away if one wanted to believe in the convent's goodwill. And Montclair preferred to believe. It would have been so simple, so tragically simple for the pattern to continue unchallenged. People file reports, get bureaucracy, move on. But patterns have a way of attracting attention when someone refuses to let them be comfortable coincidences. Detective Elena Ruiz noticed the pattern. She was new to the Montclair force, young enough to be overlooked by some, steady enough to be underestimated by none who had watched her work. What caught her attention were the threads that, when pulled, led to the same place, St. Jude's. Each missing man had stepped into the shelter in exactly the same way, for the same reasons, and each had disappeared without a trace within weeks of receiving special attention from one person. Her first knock on the convent door was met by silence, and then by a sister who seemed surprised anyone would expect her to answer. Sister Mary Agnes received Detective Ruiz the way she received everyone, with a kindly smile and a cup of tea. She spoke in calm platitudes about redemption and the fragility of human life. Her hands, when she passed the tea, were steady. Her gaze, when it touched Ruiz's, seemed untroubled. "We have always answered God's call," she said, as if to remind both of them that faith tended to explain what reason could not. On the surface, Sister Mary Agnes was what she presented: patient, prayerful, and quietly efficient. Her volunteers sang of her capacity to soothe panic, to quell addiction with words that felt like release. She knew names, histories, and wounds. She stitched comfort into the fabric of people's days. The ease with which she did this only made Detective Ruiz's case harder to prosecute in the court of public opinion. Who wanted to tarnish a saint? Who would look an angel in the face and call it demon? Still, Ruiz dug. She listened to families not because they had clout, but because they had grief. She cataloged name lists and cross-checked addresses. She traced the men back to the nights they had spent at the annex, to the envelopes of checks that had been cashed in molasses slow patterns. The trail pulled at several loose ends: of vans seen outside the convent on a night someone vanished, records of men being helped to hire but not actually working anywhere, medical files that stopped abruptly. These were small and messy, but they had the weight of repetition. The first public crack came not from the police but from a reporter who had not yet learned the gentle hands of the city would clip his wings. His piece ran on a slow Tuesday, a feature about the city's burgeoning migrant support system. It mentioned St. Jude's and dropped a casual line about the troubling number of temporary volunteers who had disappeared. The comments section ignited. Within days, the parish mailbox overflowed with letters. Bitter, scared, incredulous. The townsfolk began to remember, and memory is the cruelest of catalysts. Sister Mary Agnes's face at the center of this growing storm was, by all accounts, unchanged. She kept teaching catechism, kept her soup ladle warm, kept the corner of the annex tidy in ways that made the mind resist uglier imaginings. In private, and this part was the most dangerous of all, she began to recite a different kind of prayer. Alone in the small chapel at odd hours, with a candle guttering, she whispered to something she called the bridegroom. A ritual, a philosophy, a belief that the city could not conceive. In her telling, she did not slaughter. She redeemed. Each man who came to her, she told herself, was given a mercy he had been denied. An end to suffering, a release into a sanctified oblivion. If her church believed in absolution, Sister Mary Agnes believed it absolute. The thought tastes wrong even written down. A faith turned knife-edged, compassion contorted into cruelty. And yet people performed such contortions when they believed themselves agents of a higher good. That perverse theology gave her both justification and a terrifying calm. Montclair, still clinging to its comforts, would go on for a while longer calling her saintly. But a city is porous. News trickles outward and arrives in unexpected hearts that will not be soothed by a smile. Questions will be asked at kitchen tables. Missing persons reports will be dusted off. Embers of curiosity, given a breath, will burn. And when the first family refuses to accept a shrug and demands a body, the delicate balance that had protected Sister Mary Agnes might begin to erode. For the moment, though, the convent doors remained closed, the candles still lit, and St. Jude's remained a sanctuary on its face. Beneath that sanctuary lay a calculus no one had yet fully seen, the measure of mercy she had taken into her own hands, and the uncounted lives that would be used to justify a darkness she called salvation. Liam Hayes had been chasing small stories for most of his 32 years. Ribbon cuttings, charity drives, the occasional human interest piece that let him sleep at night. He liked local journalism because it felt honest and because it put him close to the human chassis of a town. Montclair, for all its immaculate sidewalks and cathedral sermons, had always been full of human stories. It was, in his view, a newspaper's proper feeding ground. He would have called his next assignment routine, a feature on the spike of homelessness in the city. He signed up, as he always did, to walk the blocks, to sit in soup lines and listen. He expected to return with the usual roster of sorrow and small victories. He did not expect to find a pattern that would set his teeth on edge. The first time he noticed it, it was almost accidental. He was wading through a stack of missing persons reports in the police blotter database, the tiny municipal font crawling under his eyes. There was something about the names, the ages, the neighborhoods. He flagged a couple of entries on his laptop and kept reading. The second and third names felt like thuds in his chest. Teenagers, men barely 20, gone within weeks of each other. The dates clustered like storm cells. He scrolled back and charted them in a spreadsheet for the rhythm of it: name, age, last seen, reported by whom, connection to St. Jude's, as a journalist does when hunting for a lead. By the time he had 12 names in a column, the hair along his arms had a dozen small upticks of shock. Each of them had, at one point in the week before they vanished, been seen at or around St. Jude's outreach. Some had slept in the annex, others had volunteered in the soup kitchen. A few had been introduced to potential employers through the shelter. The overlap was too specific to dismiss. The tiny, polite borough of Montclair, with its habit of trusting saints, had, in Liam's spreadsheet, begun to look like a map of loss. He printed the list. Paper anchors the mind differently than pixels. A printed list is heavier, louder. He carried it into the newsroom and spread it across his editor's desk with a carefulness he'd learned over years of courting attention without alienating it. "This is a pattern," he said. "I know it sounds crazy, but they all come back to the shelter." His editor, Mara Klein, peered over the rim of her glasses, the newsroom's afternoon light stroking the wire of her jaw. "That's a heavy accusation to make on a list," she said. "You have names and circumstances. You don't have proof." "I don't expect proof today," Liam answered. "But I expect curiosity. Someone should look harder." Mara studied his face for a long second and then sighed. "You dig? Then bring me what you find. But be careful. You go after a church figure here, and you'll get the town's cantor singing at your door." He understood the warning. In Montclair, faith was currency. Accusations against a nun would not be taken lightly. But being careful would not stop him. The men on his list had faces in his mind now. A volunteer who laughed too loud, a quiet dishwasher with paint-stained fingers, a county line laborer whose parents didn't have the money to come collect his absence. They were not statistics. They were missing. His first step was the families. He called the numbers on the reports, tracked down an aunt in Ohio who had reported her nephew missing, and a cousin who worked in a different city. People were tired, defensive, and relieved someone was looking. They told him snippets. He called a few times, said he found work through a woman at St. Jude's. He'd been nervous that week. New city. He trusted them. None of these were allegations. They were intimations. But stacked together, intimations became suspicion. On a rainy Tuesday, he took a walk to the shelter itself, notebook heavy in his pocket. St. Jude's was exactly as rumor described. Humble brick, a modest hand-painted sign, the scent of stew floating from an open kitchen window. Volunteers shuffled about with casserole dishes and boxes of clothing. The men Liam watched transient, guarded, sometimes grateful, moved through the line and out again. He introduced himself to a volunteer named Rosa, who agreed to talk. She spoke fondly of Sister Mary Agnes, of the way the nuns sat with the lonely men, took their hands, and somehow persuaded them to keep trying. She saved so many of them, Rosa said softly, eyes bright. If she's part of anything bad, it'd make no sense. Liam left with more questions than answers. The puzzling thing was not that the men passed through St. Jude's that would be ordinary, but the persistence of the connection when he mapped it across months and names. He plotted the addresses on yet another spreadsheet and drafted the first of many emails to the diocese. The response from the diocese was polite and immediate. Sister Mary Agnes was, they wrote, a devoted servant with a spotless record. Nothing to see here, thank you, next. The official silence felt slick, like a stone that refused to be moved. Liam's next stop was the police. He took his printed list to the Montclair Police Department and asked to speak with whoever handled missing person cases. He wasn't naive. He expected pushback. What he had not expected was the kind of dismissive contempt that sometimes follows anyone who dares question sacred cover. You're accusing a nun? Said a detective with a badge that had been long polished by better weather. His nameplate read Harris. He didn't smile. Sister Mary Agnes is a pillar. Do you have something on her? Or are you chasing ghosts? Liam felt the journalist's itch, to be both precise and patient. He placed the paper on the desk like a small, accusing altar. No accusations yet. I have a pattern. I have families asking why their sons aren't on any radar. I have sightings. I have receipts, delivery trucks seen at odd hours near the convent property. That's not nothing. Harris slammed a folder closed with a thump that silenced the small talk in the station's reception area. We get missing persons, drifters, runaways. This is a bread and butter town. If these kids are gone, there are plenty of reasonable explanations. You want to dig, do it carefully. Don't make enemies of people who'll hire you. He left the station with a frosty politeness that felt like a shove. It was not just the detective's attitude that troubled Liam. It was the defensive tenor of an institution whose members had grown used to official deference. A nun, that is, an institution wrapped in moral armor, could be more shield than pen to a journalist. To press the issue would be to risk career and reputation. To ignore it would be to ignore dead men. He almost did ignore it. For 24 hours he walked through his life carrying the list like a new scar. The city's ordinary rhythms tried to reclaim him. Coffee orders, press releases about a new park bench, a postcard from his sister. But the list was a migraine that refused to fade. Then he found the farmhouse. It was, by all accounts, unremarkable. A low-slung structure behind a line of pine and birch, its clapboard siding weathered and gray. According to the land registry, it belonged to the diocese and was listed as storage. The property lay at the end of a dirt lane, a place where the road shrank to a whispered track and the city's hum dropped into nothing. It had the quality of a place left for other people's shadows. Liam had found it through a handful of mundane records. A receipt for a truck rental on a night one of the men vanished, a log of materials ordered to St. Jude's Annex and delivered to the farmhouse address, a maintenance request that had been signed and rubber-stamped. The traces were bureaucratic, the kind of breadcrumbs that led out of the public eye. He drove there one dull morning in a rental, heartbeat pacing mild and keen. The forest swallowed the lane and spit him out into the farmhouse's yard. There was no light in the windows, but there were signs of recent use. A cigarette butt, a fresh smear in the mud by the back stoop, someone's footprints in the soft earth leading to a side door. A single tire mark rung in the gravel suggested a van had left not long ago. When he pushed at the old side door, it stuck at first, then gave with a sound like the exhale of something trapped. Inside, the smell hit him, not decay, not yet, but the close, damp tang of a place lived in secret. Stacks of boxes, a rusting cot, towels folded and folded again, a ledger book on a dusty table, a rosary caught on a nail. The minutiae of ordinary living undercutting his rising dread like a slow drum. He took photographs with his phone, careful, almost devout. He scribbled notes. There were receipts, numbers carefully logged for fertilizer, topsoil, heavy sacks of compost, odd purchases that made little sense for a diocesan storage, large quantities of lime and acid cleaners, items better suited for the breakdown of organic material than the care of stockpiles. He left the farmhouse with his head full of questions and palms full of evidence, and he did something he would later regard as inevitable. He spoke to Detective Anna Chun. Anna was smaller than her nameplate suggested, slight and unassuming, but her reputation was quietly formidable. She had been on missing persons cases before. She understood patterns like fingers understood ropes. When Liam brought his printouts and his farmhouse photos to the station, she sat with them like a person reading the entrails of a bird. Her jaw tightened when she saw the ledger images and the delivery logs. "I've seen this before," she said finally, her voice low. "Not the nun part, but the burials under cover, the way someone uses a charitable rotation to funnel people into a closed system. We tried to go further once." She tapped the file folder. "I was blocked. Politics. Fear of scandal. People with little power get used to being invisible. Institutions with too much influence get used to being protected." She looked at him with a fierce, honest exhaustion. "If your pattern is right, that farmhouse could be central. We don't have probable cause yet. But if we stake it out quietly, we might catch movement. We might find receipts that match other nights. Or we might set off every alarm on someone's cannon. You up for risking the career, the reputation, for a possible scoop?" Liam felt the old expanse of journalistic hunger lighting him up. He thought of the faces, the missing, the left behind. He thought of the city that liked stories to end neatly, where saints were safe because no one looked too hard. "Yes," he said. "I'm up." They planned in a tight whisper. Surveillance at dusk, remote cameras hidden in the pines, a borrowed van idling a mile down the lane. Anna would try to convince a supervisor to sign off on a follow-up warrant if they found anything incriminating. Liam would keep digging, running names, checking vans for rental receipts, pushing the houses of worship records for delivery logs. It was reckless. It was urgent. As they parted that afternoon, the sky pressed low and white over Montclair. The diocese bells called the faithful to vespers, their tones calm and comforting. In the thin breath between one bell and the next, Liam looked back down the lane at the farmhouse. A light had come on in one of the upstairs windows, a tobacco-yellow square that could have been anything. A return on a late chore, a sister burning the midnight oil, a neighbor coming in from the rain. For a second, it felt like an eye-opening. He did not sleep that night, not all the way, and when he closed his eyes, the names on his list rearranged themselves into long shadows that lengthened toward the farmhouse, as if the place had been there all along, waiting for them to look. Under the guise of a routine church property inspection, Detective Anna Chun and Liam Hayes secured a key to the forgotten farmhouse. From the outside, the place seemed ordinary, just a weathered, time-worn structure standing silently at the edge of the forest, its windows clouded with grime, the roof sagging under years of neglect. Yet there was something about the farmhouse that radiated unease, as if the very air around it had absorbed decades of whispered secrets. Liam felt his pulse quicken as they approached the door, and even the seasoned detective's hand trembled slightly when she slid the key into the rusty lock. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed through the hollow interior, releasing a breath of stagnant air that seemed to wrap around them like a shroud. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Dust motes swirled lazily in the weak beams of light filtering through broken shutters, but beneath the smell of mold and decayed wood was another scent, sickly sweet, cloying, disturbingly out of place. It reminded Liam of flowers left too long in stagnant water, a fragrance that tried to mask the unmistakable undertone of rot. The rooms they passed through were unremarkable at first glance, filled with abandoned furniture, warped pews, and stacks of religious relics covered in cobwebs. It was unsettling, but not incriminating. Liam's heart sank. For a brief moment, he wondered if they had made a terrible mistake, that all of his suspicions about Sister Mary Agnes would collapse into nothing more than paranoia, leaving him disgraced and Detective Chun humiliated. Then they reached the cellar door. It was tucked away behind a warped wooden panel, as though someone had deliberately tried to conceal it. A heavy, rusted padlock clung to the latch like a guardian, its surface pitted and corroded with age. The sight of it sent a shiver down Liam's spine. Chun exchanged a grim look with him before forcing the lock with a crowbar. The snap of metal breaking was deafening in the silence of the house, like a gunshot announcing their intrusion. The door swung open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. A gust of damp, fetid air wafted upward, chilling their skin. Liam hesitated, his journalistic curiosity warring with the primal instinct screaming at him to leave. But Chun switched on her flashlight, its beams slicing through the gloom, and nodded firmly. Together, they began the slow descent, each creak of the wooden steps echoing like a warning. At the bottom, the beam of light revealed a space that was nothing like the chaos above. The cellar was immaculate, disturbingly so. The stone floor had been scrubbed clean, the walls lined with shelves of neatly arranged items. Candles, chalices, rosaries, and crucifixes, all polished to a shine. It looked less like storage and more like a shrine. But at the center of this bizarre sanctum was the true horror. Dozens of wooden coffins stood in perfect rows, each one identical, carved with a simple cross on the lid. As Liam approached, he froze. There were names engraved beneath the crosses, names he recognized. Names he had seen on the missing persons reports. His throat went dry, his hands trembling as he reached out to trace the letters of one. Daniel Foster, age 21. Another read Michael Reed, age 19. And another. Every coffin bore the name of a man who had disappeared. This is impossible, Liam whispered, his voice breaking. But the nightmare wasn't finished. In the very center of the room stood a massive table illuminated by a solitary lamp. Spread across it was a vast map of Montclair, every street and alley rendered in precise detail. Red pins peppered the map like drops of blood, each connected by taut threads to a paper tacked on the wall. Chun stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she read the papers. They contained full names, ages, dates of disappearance, 49 in total. Each one catalogued, documented, and preserved as though part of some grotesque collection. The realization struck them like a physical blow. This was no random violence, no series of desperate killings. They were staring at the work of someone who believed in order, who found beauty in precision. Sister Mary Agnes had built an archive of her victims, treating each stolen life as if it were an offering, a piece of art in her macabre gallery. For a long, suffocating moment, neither of them spoke. Liam's stomach churned as the scale of her crimes sank in. He felt the bile rise in his throat, his mind screaming at him to flee, but his feet were rooted to the floor. Chan, though outwardly calm, clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles whitened. "This isn't just murder," she said finally, her voice low, almost reverent in the face of such horror. This is a philosophy. She thinks she's saving them." Liam staggered back, the weight of the truth crushing him. Sister Mary Agnes, the angel of Montclair, the woman the city revered, was not a saint. She was a predator who saw herself as chosen, her slaughter reimagined as salvation. The room itself was her confession, her cathedral of blood hidden beneath the veneer of holiness. And as they stood there in that silent chamber of death, they both knew one terrifying thing. This was only the beginning. Sister Mary Agnes was arrested at the convent. She showed no resistance, no surprise, simply a serene calm that chilled the investigators to the bone. In the interrogation room, she was not the timid, pious nun they had expected. She was poised, eloquent, and dangerously logical. Detective Chun led the questioning, presenting the overwhelming evidence found in the farmhouse. Sister Agnes listened patiently, her hands clasped calmly in her lap. When Chun finished, she simply smiled. "You've only found the vessel, detective," she said, her voice soft. "You haven't understood the purpose." She then began to speak of her life's work, a terrifying philosophy of her own creation. She believed that the souls of the weak and sinful were a stain on the world. However, she believed the souls of young, healthy men, untouched by the corrupting influences of age, were pure and valuable. Her murders were not acts of hatred, she claimed, but acts of spiritual purification. She believed that by taking their lives at the peak of their purity, she was freeing their souls from the potential corruption of the world. "I didn't kill them, detective," she said, her eyes gleaming with a manic conviction. "I saved them. I kept them from a future of pain and sin. I released them to God, whole and beautiful." Her chilling confession revealed the fractured logic of a deeply disturbed mind, a belief system so warped that it inverted the very tenets of her faith. Her crimes were not a means to an end. They were the end itself, a twisted, macabre prayer. The trial of Sister Mary Agnes was a sensation, a media circus that drew international attention. The prosecution laid out the brutal, undeniable truth of her crimes, backed by forensic evidence and her own chilling confession. But what captivated the public was her unwavering, almost serene defiance. She stood in court not as a criminal, but as a martyr, her composure unshaken. The defense argued for an insanity plea, presenting a profile of a deeply troubled woman who had created her own reality to justify her heinous acts. But in the end, the jury, unable to look past the sheer premeditation and cold logic of her crimes, found her guilty. The verdict was met with a mix of relief and a profound sense of sorrow. She was sentenced to life in prison, but even as the gavel fell, she showed no emotion. She left the courtroom with the same serene smile, convinced she had fulfilled her life's purpose. The case left an indelible scar on Montclair, shattering the community's innocence and forcing them to confront the terrifying notion that evil can masquerade as good, and that the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who believe they are saints. The legacy of Sister Mary Agnes became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder that we must always look beyond the facade, for sometimes the most insidious darkness hides in the most unlikely of places.